There is a book on your shelf right now. Maybe someone you respect recommended it. Maybe you downloaded it at 2 in the morning when something in your life stopped working. Maybe you have read it 3 times and still keep it close. The book is called Meditations. It was written by the most powerful man on earth, the ruler of 60 million people, the commander of 30 legions, a man who controlled more territory than any single human being alive today comes close to controlling. He never meant for you to read it. Right now, in the spring of 180, he is lying on a campaign cot in a military tent on the banks of the Danube River. He is 58 years old. He has been emperor of Rome for 19 years. He has spent the last 14 moving between military camps on this river, while the senators back in Rome slept in marble houses, and the people of the city went about their lives under the assumption that someone, somewhere, was holding the line. He was the one holding the line. A plague has been carving through his empire for 14 years. Barbarian armies are pressing against his borders. His body is failing in ways the physicians around him are careful not to name out loud, and he is doing what he has done every night for years. He is writing, not a military order, not a letter to the Senate, a private argument he has been having with his own character for 2 decades. A daily attempt to become the person he believed he should be, rather than the person that power and exhaustion and loss were constantly trying to make him. He writes about the mind, about what belongs to you and what does not, about the one territory that no army can take and no plague can touch, which is the choice of how you respond to what happens to you. He writes it because he needs the reminder. The most powerful man in the world needs to write himself a reminder about what power actually means. History will call him the last of the 5 good emperors, the philosopher king, the Stoic on the throne, the man who proved that wisdom and power could exist in the same person at the same time. What history does not tell you is what it actually cost him to be that man. Every single day, for 19 years. This is that story. Now go back 60 years, to a boy in Rome who had no idea any of this was coming. Rome, 121. The city in the 2nd century is the largest, wealthiest, most sophisticated place on the planet. 1 million people inside its walls. Aqueducts carrying fresh water from the hills. Markets selling goods from Britain and India and everywhere between. The Forum crowded every morning with lawyers and merchants and philosophers and every variety of human ambition that a civilization at its peak can generate. Into this world. On April 26th, 121, a boy is born to a family of Spanish origin that has been Roman for generations. His father holds the rank of praetor. His mother is the daughter of a wealthy brick manufacturer whose name appears on building materials all over the city. They are the kind of family Rome runs on. Educated, prosperous, well-connected, not the imperial family, not ancient senatorial lineage. People who have earned their position and understand how to keep it. The boy is named Marcus Annius Verus. His father dies when he is 3 years old. This fact gets noted in the historical record and then passed over quickly. The way facts get passed over when they do not fit the heroic shape a story is supposed to take. But consider what it means. Marcus Aurelius, the man who will spend decades writing about loss and impermanence and the necessity of accepting what cannot be controlled, loses his father before he is old enough to remember him. His first lesson in impermanence arrives before he has words for it. His grandfather takes over. Marcus Annius Verus, the elder, is by every account. A serious man. Calm, deliberate. The kind of person who treats character as something you build through daily choices rather than something you are simply born with. The household he runs is demanding in the way that households shaped by old Roman values tend to be demanding. Discipline is not optional. The gap between what you say and what you do is noticed and addressed. The boy absorbs this. He also absorbs something that no curriculum teaches: the habit of watching, of paying attention to the distance between what people perform and what they actually are, of noticing in a world full of performance. The rare person who is simply present, a teacher named Diognetus, enters his life in early childhood. Marcus will credit him later, in the opening pages of Meditations, with something specific, not philosophy, not rhetoric, the discipline of not being impressed by things designed to impress, the habit of looking for what is actually there rather than what someone wants you to see. It is a strange thing to credit a childhood teacher with. It is exactly the right thing, because the most dangerous quality a future emperor can develop is the willingness to believe in his own specialness. The most useful quality is the capacity to doubt it. Diognetus plants doubt in a boy who is about to have very compelling reasons to believe the opposite. The compelling reasons arrive in the form of an emperor. Hadrian notices Marcus Annius Verus when the boy is around 10 years old. In a world where every child of ambition performs from the moment they can walk into a room containing someone important, this particular child is simply watching, thinking, not trying to be noticed. Hadrian calls him Verissimus, the most genuine, from a man who spent his reign studying the gap between performance and reality. This is not a casual observation. It is a verdict. Hadrian has no biological heir. He has been constructing a succession arrangement that will shape Roman history for decades. He will adopt a senator named Antoninus, who will become Antoninus Pius, on the condition that Antoninus in turn adopt 2 young men as his own heirs. One of them is a boy named Lucius Sionius Commodus. The other is Marcus Annius Verus. Marcus is 17 years old when Antoninus Pius formally adopts him in 138. He becomes Marcus Aelius Aurelius Verus. He has not asked for this. He has not campaigned for it or positioned himself for it in any of the ways that ambitious young Romans position themselves for things they want. He has simply been himself. And the Emperor of Rome has decided that being himself is exactly what the empire needs. He will spend the rest of his life wondering whether the emperor was right. There is something worth sitting with in that adoption. Marcus did not choose the shape of his life. The shape was chosen for him by men who had decided what he was for before he had fully decided who he was. He is 17 years old, and the trajectory of everything, where he will live, how he will spend his days, what he will be required to become, has just been fixed by other people's decisions. His response to this, which the ancient sources note with the slightly puzzled admiration these sources often extend to Marcus, is to go back to his studies. The philosophers were waiting. He went back to the questions. He would spend the next 23 years doing exactly that, preparing for a role he had not chosen, in the only way he knew how to prepare for anything, by trying to understand it completely. Rome, 132 to 161. 29 years is a long time to wait. Long enough to build a career, raise a family, watch a city change around you, watch the people you love grow old. 29 years is, by the standards of the ancient world, most of a life. Marcus Aurelius spends 29 years waiting to become emperor. And the question worth sitting with is not what he does during those years to prepare for power. The question is what those years do to him. What they build inside a person who is intelligent enough to understand exactly what is coming, and honest enough to know that no amount of preparation makes it simple. The answer starts not with a throne room, but with a library, with books and teachers and arguments about things that have no practical application to the running of an empire. And with men who consider that fact a point in their favor. It starts with philosophy. And Marcus comes to philosophy the way some people come to religion, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a matter of survival. He is not looking for something to think about. He is looking for something to hold on to. The difference matters. A person who approaches philosophy as entertainment puts it down when something more entertaining comes along. A person who approaches it as the only available answer to an urgent question carries it for the rest of his life. The urgent question, for Marcus, is this: he is going to have more power than any person should have. He has watched enough of Rome to know what that kind of power does to people. He has seen what it makes them. He needs, before it arrives, something strong enough to resist it. He finds that something in a dead slave. The teacher who changes everything is a man named Rusticus, a senator of serious practical standing who gives Marcus a book. The book is The Discourses of Epictetus. Epictetus died around 135. When Marcus was a teenager, they never met. The distance between them is not merely the distance between the living and the dead. Epictetus was born a slave in the city of Hierapolis, in what is now western Turkey. He was owned by a man in Nero's court. He had no legal standing, no property, no rights that any Roman citizen was required to respect. He also had one of the most precise minds in the ancient world. His philosophy begins from a single distinction that sounds simple and is not. There are things within your control and things that are not within your control. Within your control are your judgments, your responses, your choices, your character. Everything else, your body, your reputation, your property, other people's opinions, the events of the world around you, is not within your control. This is not passivity. Epictetus is not saying that external things do not matter. He is saying something more precise and more difficult. He is saying that the only real freedom available to any human being is the freedom to choose how they respond to what happens to them. That this freedom cannot be taken away by any external force. That a slave who understands this is more free, in the only sense that ultimately matters, than an emperor who has confused his power over external things for power over his own mind. Marcus reads this as a young man being prepared to have total power over the external world. And here is a dead slave telling him that none of that is the kind of power that actually matters. He never gets over it. He later writes in Meditations that he owes Rusticus a specific debt for introducing him to Epictetus. He does not say it changed his life. That would be the kind of dramatic claim Marcus consistently avoids. He says it introduced him to something he needed. That careful understatement is itself a product of everything Epictetus taught him. But Rusticus is only one teacher. The education Marcus receives in these years is deliberately broad, built not to give him beautiful thoughts, but to make him capable of acting well under the specific pressures his life is going to generate. There is Fronto. Marcus Cornelius Fronto is the greatest living Latin orator of the age, the man whose prose style everyone admires and nobody can quite match. He teaches Marcus the craft of public language, the understanding of how words shape power, the difference between what is true and what is persuasive, and why a person of integrity needs to understand both. Their letters survive in partial form, discovered on old manuscripts in the 19th century, and they reveal something that the marble face of the philosophical emperor does not prepare you for. Marcus is funny. He teases Fronto. He writes with the easy warmth of someone genuinely comfortable in the relationship. He describes spending an afternoon hauling grapes with farmhands and thinking it was wonderful. He writes about the awkwardness of formal dinners with people who are performing too hard. He sounds, in these letters, like a person who genuinely enjoys ordinary things and is slightly bemused by the world of elaborate display he is being trained to inhabit. That warmth is real. It does not disappear when he becomes emperor. It goes underground. It becomes something he has to protect rather than simply express. And the cost of protecting it, decade after decade, is one of the things the Meditations quietly document without ever naming directly. There is also Apollonius of Chalcedon, who teaches Marcus what he later describes as being at the same time the most painful and the most yielding. Painful meaning hold to what you believe is right, even when it costs you. Yielding meaning remain genuinely open to being wrong. Practice both simultaneously. Without collapsing into either rigidity or weakness, he is building something across these years. Not a philosophy in the academic sense. A character, a set of practices and commitments intended not to give him beautiful thoughts, but to make him capable of acting well when the situation is genuinely difficult and the easier response is immediately available. He knows the situation is coming. Antoninus Pius becomes emperor in 138 and governs for 23 years with a steadiness and competence that the ancient sources universally admire. He rebuilds what needs rebuilding. He resolves what can be resolved. He keeps the enormous machine of the Roman state running without the dramatic gestures that tend to break things. Marcus watches from close range. He is present for the Senate meetings, the administrative decisions, the management of crises. He watches Antoninus absorb pressure without transmitting it to the people around him. He watches him never rush. He watches him always have time for a question that deserves a real answer. He takes notes, not literal notes, the kind that become part of a person's operating system. He will later write about Antoninus in Meditations with a specificity and tenderness he extends to almost no one else. The list is long and precise, and clearly the product of years of close observation, patient examination of matters, disregard of the fame that people chase, readiness to listen, working things out himself rather than having others work them out and simply delivering conclusions. He is describing the emperor he is trying to become. He is also describing, without quite saying so, the emperor he is afraid he will fail to be, because in all these years of education and observation and philosophical training, Marcus Aurelius develops something that most future emperors of Rome never develop. Genuine self-doubt, not the paralytic kind, not the kind that prevents action, the productive kind, the kind that asks, before every significant choice, whether this is the right thing or simply the convenient thing, the thing that power makes available, and that power also makes very easy to justify. That question, once planted, does not go away. He is still asking it when he is 58 years old and dying in a tent in Vindobona on March 7th, 161. Antoninus Pius eats dinner, goes to bed, and does not wake up. He is 74 years old. He leaves behind an empire in good shape and a 40-year-old man who has been preparing for this moment his entire life. When the moment arrives, Marcus does something nobody expected. He hesitates, and then he does something nobody at all expected. He shares the throne. Rome, 161. The morning after Antoninus Pius dies, the Roman Senate meets to confirm his designated successor. The confirmation is a formality. Everyone in the room knows what is going to happen. Marcus Aurelius has been the designated heir for 23 years. The Senate is not there to deliberate. It is there to ratify. What happens, instead, stops the room. Marcus stands before the Senate, accepts the title of emperor, and before anyone can begin the business of a new reign, says something that nobody has prepared for. He wants Lucius Verus made co-emperor, not a deputy, not a general with elevated authority, a full co-emperor, holding the same title, carrying the same formal weight of imperial power. The Senate is surprised. Lucius Verus is surprised. Nobody, including Lucius himself, has been operating under the assumption that he would share the throne. He has been prepared for an important supporting role. He has not been prepared for this. Marcus insists. The Senate agrees. And in that single act, on the first morning of his reign, Marcus Aurelius tells you everything about who he is. The ancient sources offer explanations. Marcus's commitment to fairness. The political reality that Lucius has military credibility Marcus lacks. The practical value of having two faces of authority rather than one. All of these are real, and all of them are true. But there is a third reason that the sources gesture toward without fully naming. Marcus did not want to be alone with it. Consider what he is inheriting. 60 million people. An empire across 3 continents. 30 legions requiring pay, supply, and leadership. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Legal disputes from every province requiring imperial judgment. Diplomatic relationships with Parthia to the east. Germanic tribes to the north. Client kingdoms on every border. Financial accounts that are, if you look at them carefully, less comfortable than the official picture suggests. And underneath all of it, the awareness that everything Antoninus built over 23 years of patient governance is now entirely his responsibility. That if it goes wrong, it goes wrong on his watch. That the man who has spent decades cultivating the habit of honest self-assessment is now in the position where honest self-assessment is the most frightening thing available to him. He shares the throne. He gives Lucius genuine authority and genuine credit. He does this knowing that a successful Lucius will come back more famous, that the empire will see another face at the center of power, that the distribution will cost him something in terms of how history records the reign. He does it anyway, because a well-governed empire is more important than a tightly held throne. This is not a small thing. Most emperors do not do it. On the morning of the accession, there is a man in the imperial palace who has served through 3 emperors. He has watched 2 previous men take power. He knows what that moment does to people. He has seen the almost physical expansion that occurs when someone realizes the thing they have been moving toward is finally, actually, theirs. He does not see this in Marcus. What he sees instead is harder to name. A settling, not the settling of someone who has arrived somewhere they always wanted to be. The settling of someone who has accepted something they always knew was coming and has decided, in the accepting, to carry it as cleanly as possible. 3 emperors. This one is different. Marcus's first significant act, beyond sharing the throne, is to write to the Senate. The letter is formal and correct in all the ways that official correspondence is supposed to be. It expresses gratitude. It acknowledges the weight of the responsibility. It commits to governing in the tradition of what came before. And then, in the middle of the letter, Marcus does something no new emperor in living memory has done. He asks for advice, not rhetorically, not as a performance of false humility. He asks the Senate what they believe should be prioritized in the early months. He asks which problems they consider most urgent. He invites their honest assessment of the financial situation. The Senate reads this and does not know what to do with it. They are accustomed to emperors who consult them the way powerful people consult those beneath them, presenting a decision already made and inviting agreement. They are not accustomed to being asked what they actually think by someone who appears to mean the question. One of the older senators, a man who has been in the Senate long enough to remember Hadrian, reads the letter twice. He folds it carefully. He thinks about what it means that the most powerful man in the world is asking him a real question. He picks up his pen and begins to write a real answer. He will spend the rest of Marcus's reign doing the same thing. And he will remember, when he is very old, and the reign has ended in ways nobody anticipated that morning, that this was how it began, with a genuine question, with the rare and slightly unsettling experience of being taken seriously by someone who did not need to take him seriously at all. Back in the palace, Marcus has already moved past the letter. There are dispatches from the eastern frontier, financial reports that need reading, judicial appeals from 3 provinces that have been waiting longer than they should have been waiting. He has been emperor for approximately 6 hours. He sits down at his desk. He gets to work. And beginning on some night in these early years, a night that no source records and that left no official trace, he starts doing something else as well. He starts writing to himself, not to the Senate, not to history, not to the admirers who will eventually find the pages, to himself, to the person he is trying to be, to the person he is afraid of not being. He will not stop until he runs out of nights. Rome and the Eastern Frontier, 161 to 169. There is a portrait of Lucius Verus in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna that has been looking at visitors for nearly 2,000 years. He is handsome in the way that draws rooms toward a person before they have said a word. His beard carefully groomed, his expression carrying the relaxed confidence of someone who has never had significant difficulty being liked. Stand a portrait of Marcus beside it, and the difference is immediate. Marcus looks like a man thinking about something. Lucius looks like a man enjoying himself. Both of these are accurate impressions, and both of them are exactly what the Roman Empire needs in 161. The historical record has not been generous to Lucius Verus. He has spent 2,000 years being assessed primarily in comparison to his co-emperor and adoptive brother. And the comparison is not flattering. When the person you are measured against is Marcus Aurelius, very few people come out well. But set the comparison aside and look at what Lucius actually brings. He understands something about leadership that Marcus, for all his philosophical sophistication, does not naturally possess. He understands the emotional dimension of command. Soldiers do not follow abstractions. They follow people, and people follow people who make them feel that being in their company is, at some level, worth being in. Lucius can walk into a room of exhausted legionaries and shift the quality of the air. This is not nothing. In a military empire that runs on loyalty, this is very nearly everything. In 162, the Parthian Empire crosses the Roman frontier in the east. The client kingdom of Armenia falls under Parthian control. The governor of Syria suffers a humiliating defeat. The eastern frontier, which has been relatively stable for decades, is suddenly not stable. Marcus makes a decision. He sends Lucius, not because Marcus doubts his own capacity to command. He sends Lucius because he understands, with the honest self-assessment that defines him, who is better suited for what this particular moment requires. The Eastern legions need to see a face attached to Rome's authority. They need to feel that the empire is paying attention at the level that matters most. Lucius is the right face for that purpose. Marcus stays in Rome. He manages the finances of the campaign from the capital. He handles the administrative machinery that keeps the rest of the empire functioning while the Eastern operation unfolds. He reads the reports that Lucius's generals send back and makes the strategic decisions that give the campaign its shape. He does the work that does not appear on victory inscriptions. Lucius does the work that does. The Parthian campaign runs from 162 to 166. By any military measure, it succeeds. The Parthians are driven back. Armenia is restored. The Parthian capital of Ctesiphon is sacked. Lucius returns to Rome with enough military glory to justify the most elaborate triumphal celebration the city has seen in years. Marcus shares the triumph. He takes the same victory titles: Armeniacus, Medicus, Parthicus, Maximus. His name appears alongside Lucius's on the official inscriptions. The victory belongs to both of them, or so the record says. He also knows, with the precise self-awareness that is his defining quality, that the distribution of credit on those inscriptions does not perfectly match the distribution of work. He keeps the private accounting accurate. He gives Lucius the public credit. This is one of the small, unremarked acts of honesty that run through Marcus's reign, like a thread you can only see if you know where to look. But the Parthian campaign brings back something besides glory. The soldiers who march back from the east in 166 carry with them a disease that nobody can name and nobody knows how to stop. We will come to that. First, stay with Lucius a little longer. In 169, while traveling with Marcus in northern Italy on the way to the Danube frontier, Lucius suffers what the ancient sources describe as an apoplexy. He is 38 years old. He dies 3 days later. Marcus has governed beside this man for 8 years. He has shared the weight of the empire with him, relied on his specific strengths, covered for his specific weaknesses, presented a unified face to the world. He has, by every available account, genuinely liked him, and now he is alone, not alone in the practical sense. He has advisors and generals and the entire vast machinery of Roman imperial governance, but alone in the sense that matters more, alone with the responsibility, alone with the knowledge that every significant decision from this point forward is entirely his, alone in the specific way that the notebooks, which he has been writing for several years by now, understand and address, and never quite resolve. He buries Lucius with full imperial honors. He manages the formal processes of bereavement with the careful attention he brings to everything formal. He delivers the appropriate public expressions of grief. Then he turns north. The Danube is waiting. The tribes on the other side are waiting. The war that will define the second half of his reign is waiting. There is a man in Rome who has worked closely with both emperors during the 8 years of co-rule. He watches the funeral procession for Lucius and then watches Marcus in the days afterward. He has watched people manage loss before. He knows the difference between the management that is a performance and the management that is genuine. When a person is actually holding themselves together rather than pretending to, what he sees in Marcus is the latter. not Stoicism in the philosophical sense. Or, not only that, something more physical, the visible effort of a person putting one thing down in order to pick something else up, knowing that the thing being put down will still be there when there is finally time to return to it. Marcus will return to it. In the tent, at night, in the small hours before dawn when the camp is quiet and there is nothing left between him and whatever he actually feels, he will write about impermanence, about loss, about the importance of not holding too tightly to things that time will take regardless of how tightly you hold. He will write these things because he is learning them from experience. The books helped. The experience is the thing that actually teaches. He goes north. He goes north alone, for the first time, to a war that has no clean ending, to a frontier that will not let him stop, to 19 more years of being the person the empire needs him to be. He goes because there is no one left to share it with. He goes because that is what the situation requires. He has been preparing his whole life for exactly this. He is not ready. Nobody is ever ready for this. He goes anyway. The Eastern Provinces and Rome, 162 to 166. There is a particular kind of victory that costs more than the losing side paid. The Parthian campaign is that kind of victory. On paper, it is clean. The Eastern legions, under the tactical command of generals like Avidius Cassius, push deep into Parthian territory. The city of Seleucia falls. The Parthian capital of Ctesiphon is sacked and burned. The client kingdom of Armenia is restored to Roman influence. Lucius Verus returns to Rome with enough military glory to decorate a dozen victory columns and a list of honorific titles that takes several seconds to say out loud. The Senate declares a triumph. The crowds are large and loud. The treasury receives a portion of the eastern plunder. By every measure that Rome uses to measure such things, the campaign is a success. And then the soldiers come home. They march back along the roads that connect the eastern provinces to the Italian heartland. The same roads that make the Roman Empire governable, that allow a message to travel from Rome to Syria in 2 weeks and a legion to move from Britain to the Danube in a matter of months. They march through cities and towns and garrison posts, stopping at markets and inns and military stations along the way. They carry their weapons and their equipment and their pay and their letters home. They also carry something invisible. A disease moves with them. Nobody gives it a name yet. Nobody understands what it is or where exactly it came from. The ancient sources will later suggest it emerged from the sack of a temple at Seleucia, which is the kind of explanation that a civilization without germ theory reaches for when something incomprehensible begins to happen. What is certain is the pattern. The disease appears first among the soldiers. Then it moves into the civilian populations near the military camps. Then it moves along the roads, because roads that carry trade also carry pestilence. And the Roman road network is the most efficient distribution system in the ancient world. It reaches Rome sometime in 166. The physician, Galen, who is, at this point in his career, the most respected medical mind in the empire, and who serves as physician to Marcus Aurelius, watches it arrive with the focused attention of a man who has made careful observation his life's work. What he sees does not match anything in his considerable medical knowledge. He records the symptoms with a precision that distinguishes him from most physicians of his age. Fever that arrives suddenly and does not leave. Skin eruptions appearing on the 4th or 5th day, varying between dry and pustular in different patients. Severe diarrhea that in the worst cases turns black, which Galen understands correctly. as a sign of internal bleeding. Inflammation of the throat so severe that swallowing becomes difficult. Patients who appear to stabilize and then collapse suddenly on the 9th or 14th day without warning. He does not know what causes it. Nobody in the ancient world knows what causes disease in the way we now know. There are theories, imbalances of the body's humors, poisoned air, divine punishment, but none of them explain the pattern of transmission with any precision. Galen watches the disease move from person to person, from household to household, from neighborhood to neighborhood, and he cannot tell you why. He can only tell you what it does when it gets there. What it does is kill. In Rome, at the peak of the epidemic, the ancient sources record that the dead are carried out of the city by the cartload. The number 500 per day appears in multiple accounts. Whatever the precise figure, the basic reality is not in doubt. The city is losing people faster than it can process the loss. Families hollowed out in the space of a week. Trades losing practitioners who cannot be immediately replaced. Streets quieter than they have been in living memory. Marcus watches this from the center of it. He organizes the distribution of medical resources across the affected districts. He ensures the grain supply to the city remains adequate despite the disruption to the agricultural labor that the epidemic is causing in the countryside. He manages the public order of a city where fear is moving ahead of the actual death toll, which is saying something, because the actual death toll is already very high, and he brings Galen back. This detail matters. When the epidemic reaches its worst intensity in Rome, Galen leaves. He returns to his home city of Pergamon in western Turkey, citing an instruction from the god Asclepius received in a dream. This explanation is the kind that the ancient world accepts without pressing too hard, and that we should read as what it most probably is. A man who is frightened and looking for a reason that sounds more dignified than fear. Galen is the best physician in the empire. He understands more about disease than any living person, and knowing what he knows, he leaves. Marcus sends for him. Galen comes back. Marcus does not make the return conditional on any acknowledgement of the departure. He does not extract an apology or a justification. He needs his physician. He asks for him. He accepts the somewhat evasive explanation for the absence and moves on. He needs Galen to be useful. Making Galen feel ashamed of being human would interfere with his usefulness. This is practical reasoning. It is also unmistakably kind. Now hold this against what is happening on the Danube at the same time. The Germanic tribes that have been pressing against the river frontier for decades sense the change in Roman capacity. Whether through direct intelligence or through the simple logic of people who have been watching their neighbors carefully for a long time, they understand that this moment is different from the ones before. The Roman legions are under strength. The treasury is under strain. The attention of the empire is divided between plague management and the aftermath of the Parthian campaign. In 166, a coalition of tribes, including the Marcomanni and the Quadi, crosses the Danube. They do not raid and retreat. They push south. They reach Aquileia in northeastern Italy. The first time a foreign enemy has penetrated this far into the Italian peninsula in 300 years. Rome is stunned in the way that systems are stunned, when something their assumptions told them was impossible turns out to be possible. Marcus is not stunned. He has been reading the reports. He knew something like this was building. What he did not know was that it would arrive simultaneously with the epidemic and with the depletion of the treasury that the Parthian campaign produced, and with the death of Lucius Verus, still 3 years away, but already casting its shadow in the form of a co-emperor whose health is beginning to concern the physicians. He did not know it would all arrive at the same time. But it has. He sells the palace furniture. This moment appears in multiple ancient sources and has the quality of something that actually happened rather than something invented for effect. Because it is exactly the kind of detail that witnesses remember long after the formal records have smoothed everything into official language. The imperial palace contains centuries of accumulated treasure, gold and silver objects, fine fabrics, statues, artworks, the material residue of generations of imperial wealth. Marcus has them auctioned publicly in the Forum of Trajan. The auction runs for months. Senators and wealthy citizens bid on items that were recently in the imperial household. The proceeds go to the legions. He does not begin by demanding sacrifice from others. He begins by sacrificing what he himself controls. There is a young soldier in one of the newly recruited legions, a man from the province of Pannonia on the Danube, who joins in this period not for glory, but because the land his family farmed has been raided twice, and there is nothing left to stay for. He is not a philosophical person. He does not read Greek. He has never heard of Epictetus. What he has heard is that the emperor himself sold his own furniture to pay for the war. He turns this over in his mind while he trains. He is not sure what to do with it. Emperors, in the stories he has heard, tend to take things from people, not give things up for them. The emperor selling his own furniture to pay soldiers he will never meet is not a story that fits any category he has. He picks up his weapon. He goes to the line. He does not know that the man responsible for him being here is writing, in the hours before dawn, about the importance of doing your duty, without requiring the duty to be easy. He does not need to know. The emperor sold his furniture. That is enough. Rome and the Danube frontier. 166 to 180. Every large and confident system eventually reaches a moment when the assumption running quietly in the background, the assumption that things will more or less continue to be what they have been, gets tested in a way it cannot survive intact. Rome reaches that moment in 166. The plague does not announce itself with the clean narrative shape of a military invasion. There is no enemy to identify, no battle to fight, no treaty to negotiate. It arrives in the bodies of men who look healthy when they march through the city gates and stop looking healthy a week later. It settles into the neighborhoods, into the markets, into the crews that maintain the aqueducts and the workers who run the granaries. It becomes the condition under which everything else happens, and Marcus governs inside it. He does not have a cure. Nobody has a cure. What he has is the same thing he brings to every problem: methodical, patient, unglamorous attention to what can actually be done. Grain supply, medical resources, public order, the financial management of an empire that is spending heavily on military campaigns while simultaneously losing the agricultural labor that produces the revenue that funds those campaigns. He does all of this while the city around him is dying, and he loses people he loves. Marcus and his wife Faustina have 14 children over the course of their marriage. 9 of them die before he does, some in infancy, some in childhood, some as young adults. The ancient world accepts child mortality with a familiarity that the modern world has largely lost. But familiarity with loss is not the same as immunity to it. It does not hurt less because it is common. It hurts differently, with a kind of weight that accumulates rather than peaks. Consider what this means for a man who is also managing an empire in crisis, who cannot stop for grief because the dispatches keep arriving and the decisions keep needing to be made. and 60 million people are not going to pause while the emperor processes what has happened to his family. He does not stop. But the nights get longer. There is a physician on the palace staff, younger than Galen, responsible for the day-to-day medical care of the imperial household. He has access that senior physicians do not always have. The casual, everyday access of someone present for minor illnesses and routine examinations, who sees the emperor not in formal consultations but in the ordinary moments of a life being lived under extraordinary pressure. He notices something he does not put in any report, because it is not the kind of thing that goes in reports. In the days after each loss, Marcus Aurelius shows up for everything. Every meeting, every appointment, every judicial hearing that requires his presence, he is there. He is attentive. He is functional. Nothing in his public conduct suggests that anything has changed. But his hands are different. The physician notices this because he is trained to notice physical details. Marcus's hands, which are normally still, are not still in the days after a loss. Small, controlled movements, fingers pressing against each other, a thumb working across a knuckle. The kind of motion a body makes when the mind is managing something too large for the body to entirely ignore. Within a week or two, the hands go still again. Whatever Marcus does in those hours alone, in the tent or the study, in the dark, with the stylus and the wax tablet, it is enough. He returns to stillness. He continues. Now set beside this, the other figure, watching the same epidemic from a different angle, Galen, who came back at Marcus's request, is keeping records of a different kind. While Marcus is tracking grain supply and military recruitment and provincial tax revenue, Galen is tracking symptoms. He is building a picture of what this disease does inside a human body with a precision that will influence medicine for centuries. He is watching the same catastrophe as Marcus and seeing it through a completely different lens. Marcus looks at the plague and sees a question about the limits of human control, about what it means to govern something that cannot be governed, about the difference between what you can change and what you can only endure. Galen looks at the plague and sees symptoms, data, the possibility, however distant, of understanding. Two men, the same catastrophe, two entirely different ways of trying to survive it. Neither of them can stop it. That is the thing about the Antonine Plague that resists every narrative attempt to give it meaning. It does not respond to philosophy. It does not respond to medicine. At least not to the medicine available in the 2nd century. It responds to time. Eventually, as epidemics respond to time, when enough of the surviving population has developed whatever partial resistance repeated exposure confers, Marcus governs through it. He does not save Rome from it. He keeps Rome functional while it runs its course. This is not a heroic story in the shape that heroic stories usually take. There is no turning point, no discovery, no moment where his response changes the outcome. He simply holds the line for 14 years, while the disease does what diseases do, out on the Danube. The soldier from Pannonia, who joined because the farm was gone and there was nothing left to stay for, has been on the frontier long enough now that the river feels like a fact rather than a feature of the landscape. He fights when the situation requires it. He maintains his equipment. He thinks about home less than he used to, which is either adaptation or loss, and he is not sure which. What he carries, without examining it too closely, is a single awareness. The emperor is out here too, not visible, not nearby, but somewhere along this river, sleeping in conditions not dramatically better than his, making decisions about this exact stretch of frontier. He cannot explain why this matters. He does not try. He just knows that it does. And somewhere along the river, in a tent, just different enough from a soldier's tent to qualify as an officer's quarters, the man who chose to be here is writing about whether he is still the person he is trying to be. He does not know if he is. He writes the question down anyway. He gets up in the morning. He goes back to work. The Danube Frontier. 167 to 180 start with what the book is not. It is not a philosophical treatise. It was not written to persuade anyone of anything. It has no introduction, no conclusion, no argument that builds from premise to proof. The entries contradict each other occasionally. The same ideas appear in different formulations across different entries, as if the author is circling something he cannot quite pin down and keeps returning to try again. It is not a diary in any conventional sense. There are almost no dates, almost no specific events, almost no names of people or places. A reader who comes to Meditations looking for the texture of daily life in 2nd century Rome will be largely disappointed. The texture is almost entirely absent. What is present, on nearly every page, is a man arguing with himself. The title Meditations was given to the collection by later editors who needed to call it something. Marcus never used it. The Greek phrase he uses in the single internal reference that tells us anything about how he thought of the work translates roughly as things addressed to himself. Private notes, internal memos, the kind of writing you do not do for an audience, because the honesty required to make the writing useful is honesty that an audience makes impossible. He began writing them sometime in the late 160s, most likely during the early years of the Danube campaigns. The physical circumstances of the writing matter more than they are usually given credit for. We tend to imagine philosophers in clean rooms, at proper desks, with adequate light and the luxury of time. Marcus was writing in military tents, by lamplight, in the hours after exhausting days spent managing campaigns and making decisions that determined whether thousands of people lived or died. He was writing in the cold, on a frontier that the Roman imagination associated with the edge of the civilized world, far from the libraries and conversations and intellectual community that formed him. He was writing alone. This aloneness is not incidental. It is the condition that makes the writing what it is. When you are genuinely alone, in the way that darkness and distance from everyone who knows you makes you alone, you cannot sustain a performance. The audience is gone. What remains is whatever you actually are, whatever you actually think, whatever questions you have been unable to answer and keep returning to because they remain unanswered. The Meditations are what Marcus actually thought, not what he said publicly, not what he wanted posterity to believe he thought, what he actually thought. At the end of the day, in the absence of witnesses, this makes them almost unique in the ancient world. We have histories written by men who wanted to shape how history was remembered. We have philosophical treatises written by men who wanted to advance arguments. We have letters written by men who knew, even in private correspondence, that letters have a way of surviving their intended privacy. We do not have very much. That is simply a person thinking on paper with no audience in mind. Marcus gives us that, and what that person is thinking about, consistently across years of writing, across the wildly varying circumstances of a reign that takes him from Rome to the Danube and back and out again, is a set of questions that do not resolve. The first is about control. What is actually within his control and what is not? He returns to this distinction, which he learned from Epictetus. So many times, and in so many formulations that you understand, it is not an idea he has settled. It is a practice he is maintaining. Like a musician running scales. Like an athlete repeating a movement until it becomes reliable under pressure, he writes the distinction not because he has forgotten it, but because he knows that knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it when the situation is genuinely difficult are not the same thing. He can control his judgments, his response, his choices. He cannot control the plague, the barbarians, the deaths of his children, the failures of people he trusted, the way that power attracts a particular kind of dishonesty that he has to be constantly alert to detect. He writes about death more than about anything else. Not as a distant abstraction, but as an immediate fact. He is working to properly integrate into his daily life. He writes lists of emperors and famous men who are now forgotten. He writes that Alexander the Great and his mule driver ended up in the same condition. He writes about how many generations of people have lived and died in any given city, leaving almost no trace. These are not morbid observations. They are calibration exercises. He is trying to maintain an accurate sense of the scale of things, specifically the scale of his own importance relative to the scale of everything else. Power distorts that sense. Power creates a gravitational field around the person who holds it, pulling other people's attention and deference and flattery toward the center. And the person at the center, if they are not careful, begins to mistake the field for a fact about themselves. Marcus is careful, relentlessly, exhaustingly careful. The second question, circling through the entries, is about motivation. Why is he doing this? Why is he here on this cold river, in this tent, instead of in Rome, doing the things he would prefer to do? He knows the answer that philosophy gives. Duty. He is part of the rational community of human beings. The empire needs governing. He is the person positioned to govern it. Therefore he governs it. He knows this answer. He has known it since he was 17 years old. The answer is not always enough. He writes, in one of the passages that has surprised every generation of readers who encounters it for the first time at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work. As a human being, read that sentence carefully. The most powerful man in the world has trouble getting out of bed. He is not writing this as a confession of weakness. He is writing it as a reminder. He is writing it because he has discovered, through years of experience, that motivation is not a permanent condition, that the reasons for doing hard things do not automatically present themselves with full force every morning, that even a person who genuinely believes in what he is doing has mornings when the belief is thin and the bed is warm and the weight of everything waiting outside the tent is very heavy. He is writing instructions for those mornings. Here is what the entries from these years reveal, when you read them, not as philosophical positions, but as the record of a specific man in a specific situation. He is checking himself. Every night, in the small hours, he is asking whether he is still the person he is trying to be, or whether the pressure of the day has done something to him that he has not yet noticed. Some nights, the check reveals that he held, that the day was hard and he got through it without becoming smaller, without making a decision from fear or anger or the kind of exhaustion that makes cruelty feel like efficiency. Some nights, the check reveals that he did not hold as well as he wanted to, that he was impatient with someone who deserved more patience, that he made a judgment too quickly, that he allowed his discomfort to color a decision that should have been made on other grounds. On those nights, the writing goes longer. He writes until he has looked at the failure honestly, understood what produced it, and decided what to do differently the next day. Then he goes to sleep. He gets up in the morning and does it again. There is a man on the campaign staff, responsible for copying official correspondence, who sleeps near the emperor's tent, close enough that on quiet nights he can hear not the words, but the sound of writing, the movement of the stylus, the occasional pause, then more writing. He never sees what is being written. It is not his business, but he hears it on nights when the situation outside is worst. When a battle has gone badly or difficult news has arrived, the writing goes on longer than usual. He has noticed this pattern over months on the campaign. Bad days produce long nights of writing. Good days produce shorter ones. He does not know what this means exactly. Years later, back in Rome, when the notebook begins to circulate among people who knew Marcus, the man reads passages he recognizes without understanding why he recognizes them. Then he remembers. He remembers lying in his bedroll listening to the stylus moving in the dark. He understands, belatedly, what those long nights were. They were a man refusing to go under, using the only tool he had complete confidence in, which was not his armies or his treasury or his administrative machinery, but his own capacity for honest self-examination, to stay afloat in waters that were, by any objective measure, trying very hard to drown him. And here is the thing that matters most about those entries, the thing that 2,000 years of readers have recognized without always being able to name. He never arrives. He never writes an entry that says, "I have figured this out. I have solved the problem of how to be a good person in a position of impossible power." You can read the whole of Meditations and not find a single moment of settled resolution. What you find instead is a man who is always working on it, always trying again, always writing the same reminders in slightly different formulations, because the reminders are never quite enough and always need renewing. You do not keep reminding yourself of something you have settled. He has not settled. And that, more than any specific wisdom the book contains, is why it has survived. Because the experience it documents, the experience of trying to be better than you were yesterday, in circumstances that are not cooperating, without any guarantee that you will succeed, without any certainty that the trying makes a difference, without any reliable method for knowing whether what you believe is true or merely convenient, is an experience that does not belong to any particular century. It belongs to the morning. Every morning, the emperor who had no peace wrote to himself every night, not because he had found peace, but because he was still looking for it, and had decided that looking was better than stopping. That decision, made again and again in a cold tent on a dark river, is the whole book. Everything else is detail. The Danube frontier, 166 to 175, long wars develop a quality that short wars never have. Short wars have momentum. They have the gathering energy of a situation moving toward resolution. The sense that what is happening now is building toward something decisively different from what came before. Short wars feel, even in their worst moments, like they are going somewhere. Long wars feel like weather. They become the condition under which everything else happens. You stop thinking of them as events and start thinking of them as facts. The way you think of winter or drought. They are not moving toward resolution. They simply are. And the people who fight them, who supply them, who manage them from campaign tents on cold rivers, develop a relationship with permanence that no short war ever requires. Marcus Aurelius spends 14 years fighting a long war. The conflict that historians will eventually call the Marcomannic Wars begins formally in 166, when the Marcomanni and Quadi cross the Danube, and push into Roman territory. It does not end in Marcus's lifetime. It will not end until Roman policy on the northern frontier changes in ways that Marcus will not live to implement, and that the empire will not find the resources to sustain. He knows this. By the middle years of the campaign, he understands with the clarity that comes from reading the same reports across many years, that the Danube frontier is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be managed. The distinction matters enormously and is almost never acknowledged publicly, because acknowledging it publicly would require the Roman Empire to admit something about itself that the Roman self-image has no category for. The Roman self-image says this: Rome expands. Rome brings order to chaos. Rome takes the barbarian frontier and turns it into a province, with roads and cities and tax collectors, and the frontier moves outward. And this process continues because this is what Rome does. The reality of the Danube frontier says something else. There is a point past which expansion becomes more expensive than the territory is worth. There is a population on the other side of that river that is not going to be pacified by legions, because the pressure pushing it south comes from further north and east, and is more powerful than anything Rome can deploy to push back against it. Marcus knows this. He governs from this reality. He does not broadcast it, because broadcasting it would demoralize the Senate and the army, and give encouragement to every tribe on every frontier that Rome is tired and can be pushed. But he knows. The first phase of the campaign, from 168 to 172, is the emergency phase. The German tribes that have penetrated Italian territory must be pushed back. The Danube line must be re-established. The military capacity that the plague has degraded must be rebuilt with whatever human material is available. Marcus commands from the field. He is not a natural general in the way that Caesar was a natural general. With an instinctive tactical imagination and the ability to make split-second decisions that reshape a battle, he is something more valuable for a long war. A man of enormous patience and organizational intelligence who understands that most battles are decided before they are fought, by the quality of preparation and supply, and the sustained attention to details that determine whether an army arrives at a battlefield able to fight. His generals handle the tactical command. Marcus handles everything that makes tactical command possible. He also does something that his generals notice and remember and talk about long after the campaign is over. He stays when the situation is bad, when a battle has gone poorly, or the supply situation has become critical, or the weather has turned the frontier into something that reasonable people would not choose to be in. Marcus does not leave. He does not return to Rome, to the palace, to the conditions that his rank entitles him to. He stays in the camp. He eats what the soldiers eat. He sleeps in conditions not dramatically better than theirs. This is not performance. Or not only performance, it is a decision made on principle, that the person asking others to endure difficult circumstances should be willing to share those circumstances. And it is also a decision made on practicality, that the information you receive when you are present is not the same as the information you receive when you are absent. The compression and improvement that happen as reports travel up a hierarchy are not deliberate dishonesty. They are structural. People tell superiors what superiors need to hear. Marcus needs to know what is actually there, so he goes and looks. The military situation improves slowly. The tribes that pushed into Italy are driven back. The Danube line holds. By 172, Marcus is able to move from emergency management to something that looks more like strategic planning. The longer view, the question of whether it is possible, through the combination of military pressure and negotiated terms, to create a stable border relationship that does not require continuous full-scale military engagement. He is thinking through this when the news from the east arrives in 175. The news is that Avidius Cassius, the finest general in the Roman army, and the man Marcus trusts to govern the entire eastern portion of the empire, has declared himself emperor. There is a moment in the camp when the dispatch is read and the senior officers understand what it says, and the silence that follows is the silence of people who are recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the shape of the situation. Marcus takes the dispatch. He reads it. He is quiet for a long time. Then he calls his officers together, and what he says to them, and what he does next, will tell you more about who he actually is than any passage in the Meditations. We will come to that in the next chapter. But first, before we leave the frontier years, there is one more moment worth sitting with. It is summer, probably 173. Somewhere in the middle years of the campaign, when the war has settled into the grinding rhythm of a conflict that has stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a fact, Marcus is walking the camp at night. This is something he does regularly. Not on an inspection schedule, not with a formal retinue, but quietly, in the way that a person walks when they need to think, and the tent has become too small for the thinking. He stops at the edge of the camp perimeter, where the last of the fires gives way to darkness. He can hear the river somewhere beyond the darkness. The Danube moves at night with a sound that becomes familiar enough, after enough seasons beside it, that you stop hearing it the way you hear it on the first night. It becomes part of the silence, rather than a disruption of it. He stands there looking at the dark. He is thinking about something the notebook will try to articulate later and not quite get right. The way the notebook frequently tries to articulate things and not quite gets them right, which is part of what makes it honest. He is thinking about what it means to do the right thing when you are not sure what the right thing is. When the situation is too complicated for any principle to cover cleanly, when you are tired in a way that sleep does not fix, and the decisions keep arriving regardless, he is thinking about what it means to keep going, when keeping going is the only available answer. He does not resolve this. He goes back to the tent. He picks up the stylus. He writes. The Eastern Provinces. Spring. 175. The rumor starts moving through the eastern provinces sometime in the spring of 175. Rumors in the ancient world travel faster than official dispatches and slower than truth. They travel at the speed of merchants on the road, soldiers rotating between postings, administrators corresponding with cousins in neighboring provinces. By the time a rumor reaches its destination, it has been shaped by everyone who passed it along, colored by their fears and their hopes and their sense of what the person who told it to them was likely to know. The rumor says that Marcus Aurelius is dead. He is not dead. He is on the Danube, doing what he does every morning, which is getting up and continuing. But the rumor does not know this, and the rumor reaches a man named Gaius Avidius Cassius. Cassius is the governor of Syria, the most powerful military position in the Eastern Empire. He is also, by any honest military assessment, the finest field commander of his generation. His campaigns in Parthia, a decade earlier, established him as the man who could take an objective against difficult odds and hold it against difficult pressure. His administration of the eastern provinces has been, by the reports Marcus receives, generally competent and occasionally impressive. He is also a man of significant personal ambition who has spent his career at the level just below the top. When the rumor reaches him, Cassius makes a decision. He declares himself emperor. Whether he genuinely believes Marcus is dead, or whether the rumor provides the occasion for a decision he was already inclined toward, is a question the ancient sources argue about without resolution. What is not in dispute is that the declaration is not impulsive. Cassius has support. Egypt, the most economically critical province in the empire, declares for him. Several other eastern territories follow. He has control of a substantial portion of the empire's wealth and a significant portion of its military capacity. For a period of weeks, he is a genuine rival emperor. The news reaches Marcus on the Danube. The dispatch is read. The senior officers in the room understand what it says. There is a silence of the kind that follows information too large to immediately organize around. Marcus takes the dispatch. He reads it. He is quiet for a long time. What his face shows in that silence is something the ancient sources record in different ways. But they converge on a detail that none of them seem to have invented, because none of them seem to understand why it matters. His first response is not anger. It is grief, not for the political situation, not for the threat to his reign, or the disruption to the Eastern administration, or the military complications that a civil war would create, at exactly the moment when the Danube campaign most needs stability. He is grieving the relationship. He is grieving the loss of someone he thought he understood and apparently did not. He is grieving in the way that honest people grieve when they discover that their assessment of someone they trusted was wrong. The specific failure of his own judgment. He convenes his officers. The speech he gives them, reconstructed from accounts that survive in multiple ancient sources, is not the speech of a man marshalling anger into military action. It is the speech of a man trying to think clearly about a situation that his emotions want to cloud. He says he hopes this can be resolved without additional bloodshed. He says that Cassius was a good general who served Rome well, and that this remains true even though Cassius has done something that cannot be allowed to stand. He says that if Cassius will stand down, he will not pursue execution or punishment beyond what the situation requires. His officers receive this with the polite attention of men who are not entirely sure what to do with it. They understand the vocabulary of force and retaliation, and the importance of demonstrating that challenges to imperial authority will be met with consequences severe enough to discourage repetition. What they are hearing is something that does not fit that vocabulary. Marcus is talking about resolution, about ending this in a way that does not produce more damage than it prevents. One of the senior officers thinks, listening to this, that the emperor is going to forgive a man who just tried to take his throne. He is not sure whether to admire this or worry about it. He does both. Marcus begins the process of moving forces toward the east, not with the speed of a man pursuing a quick victory, but with the methodical preparation of someone who wants to be in a position of strength when the situation resolves. However it resolves, before the movement is complete, a second dispatch arrives. Cassius is dead. His own officers killed him. A centurion and a cavalry commander, acting on their own assessment of how the confrontation was going to end, took matters into their own hands. They killed Cassius and sent his head to Marcus as proof and, presumably, as an offering of their own continued loyalty. Marcus refuses to look at it. This detail appears in multiple ancient sources and has the quality of something that actually happened rather than something invented for effect, because it is exactly the kind of specific, slightly strange detail that witnesses remember long after official accounts have smoothed everything into formal language. He cannot make himself look at the severed head of a man he once trusted. He orders it buried with appropriate dignity. He then writes to the Senate with instructions that no one connected to Cassius should be executed. Senators who supported the rebellion should be stripped of rank, but allowed to live. Their families should not be punished for their choices. Properties seized in the initial chaos should be returned. The Senate receives these instructions with a mixture of genuine relief and genuine perplexity. The relief is practical. Some of their number had kept options open during the rebellion, in the way that experienced political survivors always keep options open when the outcome is genuinely uncertain. A different emperor might use this moment to settle scores that have nothing to do with the rebellion itself. The perplexity is genuine. They are trying to understand what kind of man responds to the most direct personal challenge to his power, with instructions about not punishing anyone too harshly. There is a senator in Rome who has watched this reign from close range, who was present when Marcus wrote that first letter asking for advice on the morning of the accession, who has spent years trying to understand how this particular emperor operates. He reads the instructions from the field and thinks about what they reveal. He understands that what Marcus is doing is not naive. It is not the generosity of a man who does not understand how power works. It is the generosity of a man who understands exactly how power works and has decided, on principle, that this is not how he wants to use it. The calculation is this: executing people after a failed rebellion is efficient. It removes potential future threats. It demonstrates consequences. It is what most emperors do. And there are real reasons why most emperors do it. It also poisons the atmosphere of a court for years afterward. It creates the specific fear that makes honest counsel impossible. Because honest counsel, in an atmosphere of fear, becomes the kind of counsel that tells the powerful person only what they want to hear. Marcus needs honest counsel more than he needs to demonstrate consequences. He will trade the demonstration for the counsel. He knows this is a gamble. He knows that someone he does not execute today might prove a problem tomorrow. He makes the gamble anyway, because governing through fear is not compatible with governing well. And governing well is the only reason he is doing any of this. The senator finishes reading. He sets the letter down. He thinks about the head that Marcus refused to look at, not the grand gesture, the pardon, the instructions, the formal mercy that will appear in the official record, the small, quiet, private refusal, the thing that Marcus could not make himself do, even when nobody was watching, and doing it would have cost him nothing. He cannot look at the head of a man he once trusted. That is not policy. That is not philosophy. That is not the calculated restraint of a ruler managing his image. That is simply who he is. In the tent that night, after the dispatches are done and the officers have returned to their quarters, Marcus writes. He does not write about Cassius. He does not write about the rebellion, or about how it felt to be betrayed by a man he valued, or about the calculation he made between punishment and principle. He writes about the importance of not doing harm to people who have done harm to you, about how the impulse to retaliate is understandable and also almost always wrong, about how the desire to hurt someone who has hurt you is the desire of a person who has confused personal injury with a cosmic injustice requiring correction. He writes it not to record a position he has arrived at. He writes it to maintain a position he is always in danger of losing. Because he is angry. He has been angry since the dispatch arrived, and the anger has not gone away just because the resolution came faster than expected. He is angry about the betrayal. He is angry about the disruption to the Danube campaign. He is angry in the quiet, contained way of a person who has spent decades learning to hold anger without being shaped by it. He writes around the anger without naming it, examining what produced it, asking whether the response the anger is pushing him toward is one he will be proud of in the morning. He decides it is not. He puts the anger down. He goes to sleep. He gets up in the morning He governs. Rome and the frontier. 161 to 178. There is a version of Marcus Aurelius that the historical record produces almost automatically. It is the version carved into marble, the version on the column, the version assembled over 2,000 years of reading and interpretation into something almost entirely public, almost entirely legible, almost entirely comprehensible as a set of principles in action. It is not wrong. The principles are real. The man who emerges from the official record is genuinely impressive in ways that do not require exaggeration. But there is a private man underneath the public one, and the private man is harder to find, partly because Marcus protected him carefully, and partly because the Meditations, which seem like the most intimate document imaginable, are actually a document about the self rather than about the specific people and moments and relationships that make up a life. To find the private man, you have to look at what is not there. You have to look at the silences. The most significant silence in the Meditations is Faustina. Annia Galeria Faustina is Marcus's wife for 30 years. She is the daughter of Antoninus Pius, which means Marcus married into the family that adopted him, a dynastic arrangement so common in Rome that it requires no explanation. What is not common is what the marriage becomes over 3 decades. She travels with him on campaign. This is unusual. Roman empresses did not typically follow their husbands to military frontiers. The logistics were complicated, the conditions difficult, the symbolism of an empress in a military camp not always straightforward. Faustina goes anyway. She is present on the Danube. She is present in Syria during the aftermath of the Cassius rebellion. The soldiers give her a title, Mater Castrorum, Mother of the Camps, an honorific that reflects a genuine relationship with the military community built over years of shared proximity. The ancient sources are not kind to Faustina. The Historia Augusta, which is the primary ancient source for Marcus's reign and also one of the least reliable ancient documents in existence, accumulates accusations against her with the energy of a text that has decided she is guilty and is working backward from that conclusion to find the evidence. Infidelity, alleged communication with Cassius during the rebellion, the vague, comprehensive accusation of being the wrong kind of woman for the right kind of man. Historians have spent decades assessing these accusations and have generally concluded that the evidence for most of them is either absent or unreliable, or both. The Historia Augusta tells us considerably more about the anxieties of the men who wrote it than about the woman it claims to describe. What we can say with more confidence is simpler and more important. Faustina dies in 175. In a small town in the province of Cappadocia, in what is now Turkey. She has followed Marcus into the east during the response to the Cassius rebellion. She is around 45 years old. The cause is not recorded in any surviving source with enough detail to be useful. Marcus asks the Senate to deify her. He asks that the town where she died be renamed Faustinopolis in her honor. He asks that a temple be built for her. He asks that an institution for the care of poor girls be established in her memory. None of this is required by the political situation. He does it because he wants to, and then, in the Meditations, in a document organized around duty and impermanence, and the cosmic insignificance of reputation, and the necessity of accepting loss, he writes this. He writes that he is grateful to the gods for giving him a wife who was, and here the Greek carries a weight that translation struggles to hold, present with him rather than against him, someone who moved through the difficulties of their shared life in a direction that aligned with his rather than pulling away from it. That is all, he writes. A few words, embedded in a longer passage about the things he is grateful for. He has 30 years of marriage with this person, and he leaves us almost nothing about it. A few words of gratitude in a private document not intended for anyone's eyes. But those few words, read in context, in a document written not to impress, but to be honest, carry more weight than any elaborate public tribute would carry. He is not performing grief. He is not constructing a monument to his own fidelity. He is simply recording, in the accounting he does every night of what matters and what does not, that this person mattered. She is gone now. He continues, the children are harder to write about because writing about them honestly means confronting arithmetic that the historical record tends to organize away from. 14 children. Say that number slowly. 14 children born to Marcus and Faustina over the course of their marriage. In the ancient world, child mortality was high enough that losing several was an expected part of family life, rather than a deviation from it. Roman families of this period understood this in a way that modern families, with modern medicine, largely do not have to. Marcus and Faustina lose 9 of their 14 children before Marcus dies. 9. Some in infancy, some in childhood, some as young adults. The plague years claim some of them. Others die from causes that the sources do not record in enough detail to determine. Marcus does not write about these deaths by name in the Meditations. He does not describe specific children or specific moments of loss. What he writes instead are meditations on impermanence that have the quality of a man who is not theorizing about loss, but processing it, working through something real in the only way he knows how to work through real things, by writing until he has said something honest about it. He writes that loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. He writes that you should accept the things to which fate binds you. He writes that you will meet the future, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason that arm you against the present. Read these passages as philosophical positions, and they are admirable and sophisticated. Read them as the words of a man sitting alone at night after burying another child, and they become something else. They become the evidence of a person applying tremendous internal force to the task of remaining functional in the face of something that is trying to make him stop functioning. He is not unfeeling. The mistake people make about Marcus Aurelius is to confuse discipline with the absence of feeling. The discipline is there because the feeling is there. The feeling, if allowed to operate without discipline, would be genuinely overwhelming. The discipline is the container, not the absence of what it contains. There is a physician on the palace staff who has access that senior physicians do not always have, the casual everyday access of someone present for routine examinations, who sees the emperor not in formal consultations but in the ordinary moments of a life being lived under extraordinary pressure. He notices something he puts in no report, because it is not the kind of thing that goes in reports. In the days after each loss, Marcus shows up for everything, every meeting, every appointment, every judicial hearing that requires his presence. He is there, attentive, functional. Nothing in his public conduct suggests anything has changed. His hands are different. The physician notices this because he is trained to notice physical details. Marcus's hands, which are normally still, the hands of a man who has learned to carry no unnecessary tension in his body, are not still in the days after a loss. Small controlled movements, fingers pressing together, a thumb working across a knuckle, the motion a body makes when the mind is holding something too large to fully absorb. Within a week the hands go still again. Whatever Marcus does in those hours alone, in the tent or the study, in the dark, with the stylus and the wax tablet, it is enough. He returns to stillness. He continues. This is the private man, not the marble figure, not the philosophical emperor, not the author of the passages that get printed on coffee mugs and quoted in leadership seminars. A man whose hands are not still for a week after losing another child. A man who writes about impermanence, not because he has mastered it, but because he has not and keeps having to try. A man who is lonely in the specific way that people are lonely when the most important parts of their interior life have no adequate audience. He writes to that person every night. And every morning he goes out and is the emperor. The empire needs the emperor. The private man is still there, still writing, still working, still trying, in the darkness and the quiet, to be honest about what it actually costs. Rome and the Danube, 161 to 180. There is a version of Marcus Aurelius that has been assembled over 2,000 years and that has become so settled in the popular imagination it functions almost as historical fact. The version says Marcus Aurelius was a good man who happened to be emperor. This version is not wrong, but it is not complete. And the incompleteness is not an accident. It is the product of a very human tendency to look at someone we admire and smooth the difficult edges, to resolve the contradictions into a coherence that makes the admiration easier to sustain. The difficult edges are there. Start with the most fundamental one. Marcus Aurelius believes, at the core of his philosophical commitments, in the equal rational nature of all human beings. He writes in the Meditations that all rational beings are equal by nature, and that any difference in status or condition is an accident of circumstance rather than a reflection of essential worth. He writes this with the conviction of someone who has thought about it carefully and arrived at a position he actually holds. He governs a slave empire. Rome in the 2nd century runs on slave labor in the most direct and comprehensive sense. Slaves build the buildings. Slaves work the mines. Slaves staff the households of the wealthy. Slaves crew the ships and tend the fields and perform the skilled trades that the Roman economy depends on. The number of enslaved people in the empire during Marcus's reign is estimated by scholars at somewhere between 10 and 30% of the total population. Even the low end of that range represents millions of human beings held in a condition that Marcus's own philosophical principles flatly contradict. He knows this. He is not unaware of the contradiction. The Stoic tradition, which is his tradition, has a complex and uncomfortable relationship with slavery, going back to its founders. Epictetus, the philosopher who shaped Marcus's thinking more than any other, was himself a slave. The Stoics are the ancient school most explicitly committed to the equal rational dignity of all human beings. They are also, most of them, people who lived in slave societies and worked out philosophical accommodations with the institution that allowed them to maintain both the principle and the practice. Marcus's accommodation is to treat enslaved people within his own household with what the sources describe as unusual consideration, to extend to them a personal decency that goes beyond what the law requires, to think of them, as his philosophy demands, as rational beings deserving of respect. This is better than the alternative. It is not enough. He knows it is not enough. The Meditations contain no explicit discussion of slavery, which is itself a form of evidence. A man who writes about justice and rational dignity and the equal nature of all beings, and who does not write about the millions of human beings held in bondage within the empire he governs. is not omitting the subject because it has not occurred to him. He is omitting it because there is no honest thing he can write about it that does not indict him. The reasons for not changing it are real. Abolishing slavery in the Roman Empire in the 2nd century is not something an emperor can do and remain emperor. The economic disruption would be catastrophic. The political opposition immediate and overwhelming. The practical question of what happens to millions of people suddenly legally free in an economy built around their unfreedom does not have an easy answer. These reasons explain why the thing was not done. They do not tell you the thing was acceptable. Marcus lives in the gap between knowing something is wrong and lacking the power or the will to fix it. He is not unique in this. Most people who have thought seriously about ethics live in that gap regarding something, but most people do not govern an empire, and the gap between Marcus's philosophical commitments and the reality of his governance is wider and more consequential than the gaps most people inhabit. He carries this. The second difficult edge is the question of religious persecution. During Marcus's reign, the Christian community in the empire is growing, but still legally vulnerable. The Roman legal framework around Christianity is complicated and has been complicated since Nero's time. Christians are not universally condemned under the law. Marcus inherits. They are also not protected. They exist in a legal grey area that provincial governors can interpret broadly or narrowly, depending on local circumstances and personal inclination. In 177, in the city of Lugdunum in Gaul, which we now call Lyon, a significant number of Christians are killed under official Roman sanction. There is a man in the administrative apparatus who processes the correspondence from that period. He is a mid-level official whose name does not appear in any document that survived. He handles reports the way mid-level officials handle reports, by reading them, categorizing them, routing them to whoever needs to act on them, and moving to the next document. He reads the reports from Lyon. They describe, in the flat language of administrative documentation, events that are not flat at all, people taken from their homes, people who refused to recant something they believed and who were then killed for the refusal, a woman named Blandina, who appears in the Christian accounts of the event with enough specific detail to suggest she was real, who endured what she endured and remained, by the testimony of people who were present, composed in a way that the witnesses found difficult to explain. The official reads this. He routes the documents to the appropriate next step in the administrative chain. He moves to the next document, but he does not entirely move on. He is not a Christian. He has no particular sympathy for the theological claims of the community at Lyon. What he has is the particular sensitivity of a man who handles enough documentation about enough human beings to develop, over years, an instinct for the difference between a report about a problem and a report about a person. The reports from Lyon are about people. He does not know what Marcus reads or does not read. He does not know the precise chain of instructions that shape what happens in Lyon. What he knows is that under the reign of the emperor who writes about the equal rational dignity of all human beings, the documentation on his desk describes something that does not look like equal rational dignity. He files the documents. He goes home. He does not mention it to anyone. What the surviving Christian account presents is a local authority seeking imperial guidance. Whether Marcus knows the full scope of the violence at Lyon, how directly his instructions shape the local response, how much responsibility he bears for specific decisions made by specific governors, these questions are genuinely contested, and the evidence does not resolve them with certainty. What is not contested is that under his reign, the existing legal vulnerability of Christians remains in place. And people die because of it. The third difficult edge is the simplest and in some ways the most instructive. Marcus Aurelius does not want to be a soldier. Everything about his temperament and his education and his genuine preferences points toward the life of the mind. He wants to be in Rome, reading, arguing philosophy, governing through the quality of his thinking rather than through the management of armies. Instead, he spends 14 years on a military frontier, commanding campaigns against peoples who are, from their own perspective, defending their territory against an expanding empire that has decided their land belongs to it. He fights wars he did not start. He orders military actions that result in deaths he does not celebrate. He prosecutes campaigns against populations whose displacement is driven by pressures that Rome's own expansion has contributed to creating. He does this because the alternative, pulling back from the Danube and accepting the loss of provinces that the empire has governed for generations, has consequences for the people in those provinces, for the military relationships that hold the empire together, for the stability that Marcus's governance depends on. He prosecutes the war. People die. He writes in his tent at night about the importance of treating all rational beings as equals and about the cosmic insignificance of any single human conflict. He is not a hypocrite in the simple sense. He is something more complicated and more human than that. He is a person who holds genuine philosophical commitments and who governs a real empire, and who has discovered, as everyone who holds genuine commitments in the real world discovers, that the commitments and the reality are not always compatible. He does not resolve this. He lives in it, and the meditations are, among other things, the record of a man who is doing the best he can with what he has, and who knows his best is not good enough, and who cannot stop trying anyway. Now here is the thing about this that matters most. The record of a genuinely good person living inside genuinely imperfect systems, doing genuinely imperfect things while holding genuinely noble principles, is not the record of a failure. It is the record that most of us actually inhabit. We do not live in clean systems. We do not have the option of pure principle, uncomplicated by institutional reality. We are not the first generation to discover that knowing the right thing and doing the right thing are different skills, differently distributed, and not always available to us simultaneously. Marcus Aurelius knew this from the inside. He wrote about it from the inside. He never resolved it. He never stopped trying to. That combination, knowing you are falling short and refusing to stop trying, is not what we usually call greatness. It does not have the clean narrative shape that greatness is supposed to have. There is no triumphant moment where the philosopher finally brings the empire into alignment with his principles. There is just the daily effort, the daily falling short, the daily decision to try again tomorrow. There is a senator named Claudius Severus, who is also Marcus's son-in-law, who has a conversation with Marcus sometime in the later years of the reign. It is not recorded in any official document. It survives in the kind of account that passes through enough hands to lose its edges but keeps its shape. Severus asks Marcus directly whether he thinks he has governed well. Marcus is quiet for longer than the question seems to require. Then he says something like this. He says he thinks he has tried to govern well, that trying and governing well are not the same thing, that the difference between them is where most of the interesting questions about human conduct actually live. Severus does not know what to do with this answer. He thinks about it for the rest of his life. So does anyone who takes it seriously. Rome and the Danube, 166 to 179. There is a question that follows Marcus Aurelius through history, like a shadow that his own brilliance casts. It does not require historical expertise to feel its weight. It arrives with the directness of the kind of question that does not care how sophisticated your framework for thinking about hard things has become. The question is, why Commodus? Why did the man who spent 19 years governing with a restraint and wisdom that the ancient world recognized as exceptional, the man who wrote endlessly about the importance of reason over impulse, about duty to the people you serve, about the obligation to consider consequences, why did that man look at his son Commodus and decide that this was the person who should inherit the Roman Empire? The question has been asked for 2,000 years. It has generated an enormous amount of scholarly discussion, and it converges on one honest point, which is that nobody is entirely satisfied with any of the available answers. We are not going to resolve it here. It cannot be resolved, but we can do something more honest than the approaches that tend either to condemn Marcus for a failure of judgment or to excuse him by arguing he had no real choice. We can look at what the situation actually was from the inside and try to understand what a man of Marcus's intelligence and honesty would have been seeing and feeling as the decision approached. Start with Commodus himself. Lucius Aurelius Commodus is born on August 31st, 161, the same year his father becomes emperor. He is the first emperor to be born into the imperial family rather than adopted into it, which is not a coincidence. It is a fact that everyone around Marcus notices, and that carries its own weight from the beginning. He grows up in a household organized around the performance of a father who is governing an empire while simultaneously trying to be a good person, the most demanding and exhausting performance in the known world, conducted by a man who is also, by every account, genuinely warm to his children. Marcus loves his son. This is the starting point for everything that follows, and it is also, paradoxically, the source of the problem. He loves his son the way fathers love sons, with a love that is not always rational and not always capable of seeing clearly, because seeing clearly requires a distance that love makes very difficult to maintain. He also knows his son. The ancient sources are not subtle about Commodus. They describe a young man who is physically impressive, genuinely handsome, possessed of a presence that fills rooms, and whose interests and aptitudes organize themselves around performance and competition and physical display, rather than the administrative and philosophical disciplines that his father has spent his life developing. Marcus brings in the best available tutors, men who have distinguished themselves in philosophy, rhetoric, law, the practical disciplines of governance. He gives Commodus the same educational access he himself received, the access that was, in his own case, transformative. It is not transformative in Commodus's case, whether because Commodus lacks his father's particular intellectual temperament, or because growing up as the unquestioned heir to the most powerful throne in the world is simply not conducive to the development of philosophical humility, or because the specific environment of the imperial court in the later years of Marcus's reign has qualities that no educational intervention can fully compensate for. The results of the education are not what Marcus hoped for. He sees this. There is no honest reading of the evidence that allows you to conclude Marcus was unaware of who Commodus was. The people around him were aware. The tutors reported back. The generals who observed Commodus during the Danube campaigns. Where Marcus brought him, beginning in 178, in what looks like a deliberate attempt to expose him to the realities of military command, were not uniformly impressed. Marcus knows. So why? The first answer, and the one that is most uncomfortable because it is most human. is that he loves his son, not in the sense that love blinds him to Commodus's actual qualities, in the sense that the knowledge of those qualities does not eliminate the love, and the love does not eliminate the hope, and the hope does not eliminate the father from the equation in the way the philosopher might prefer. Commodus is not a stranger whose qualities are being assessed from a neutral distance. He is the boy who grew up in Marcus's household, the child who was present during the losses and the absences and the long grinding years of war and plague, the person who has seen the man beneath the emperor in a way that almost no one else has, who has grown up knowing, at some level, that his father is trying very hard, and that trying very hard is not always enough. Marcus cannot make himself see his son as merely a succession problem to be solved by choosing someone more qualified. Commodus is his son. The second answer is political, and it is also real. The tradition of the 5 good emperors is a tradition of adoption. Each of the emperors preceding Marcus chose his successor based on merit rather than biology, adopting the most qualified available person and training him for the role. This tradition produced, by the consensus of ancient and modern observers, a period of unusually good governance. Marcus knows this tradition. He was produced by it. He is the last product of it. Breaking it requires justification, not in the sense that Marcus owes the Senate an explanation, because the Senate will ratify whatever he decides, but in the sense that a man who has spent his life thinking carefully about why he does what he does will not break a tradition that produced good outcomes without having reasons he can articulate to himself. His most practical reason is civil war. The adoption tradition works when the emperor has the freedom to choose from among a field of candidates without immediately producing a faction around every candidate who is not chosen. Marcus does not have that freedom. He has a biological son. The existence of a biological son creates a political reality around that son, regardless of what Marcus prefers. Choosing someone other than Commodus means either removing Commodus as a political possibility or managing the permanent risk that Commodus becomes the rallying point for anyone who wants a different emperor. Marcus has just seen what that looks like. The Cassius rebellion was triggered by a rumor and involved a man with far less claim to the throne than Commodus has. He knows what faction and civil war cost. He has read enough Roman history to know that the cost is usually measured in the blood of people who had nothing to do with the political dispute. He chooses Commodus over civil war. The third answer is the one that is hardest to verify and perhaps the most important. He hopes in the way that parents hope about their children, which is not the same as believing. He sees the signs of who Commodus is, and he also sees, or allows himself to see, the signs of who Commodus might become. He has watched governance reshape people before. He has watched responsibility change the quality of those who carry it. He cannot make himself fully extinguish the possibility that the throne might do for his son what the years of preparation did for him. This hope is probably wrong, but it is recognizably human. In 177, Marcus formally associates Commodus with his rule, giving him the title Augustus and making the succession explicit. Commodus is 16 years old. In 178, he takes Commodus to the Danube, to the front, to the reality of what he is inheriting. There is a general on this campaign who has served under Marcus for years and who spends time observing Commodus during the operations. One evening, when the day's business is done and the camp has settled into its nighttime rhythms, a colleague asks him what he thinks. He is quiet for a moment. Then he says that Commodus understands the symbolic dimension of power very well, that he has his father's physical presence and something of his father's personal ease with soldiers, that he is not stupid. His colleague waits. The general says he is not sure Commodus understands the difference between being liked and being good, that he has watched Marcus spend 19 years governing an empire while simultaneously governing himself, maintaining the internal discipline that keeps external power from becoming destructive. He has not seen evidence that Commodus is interested in that second kind of governing. His colleague asks if he has said any of this to Marcus. The general says no. His colleague asks, why not? The general is quiet for a moment longer than the question requires. He says that Marcus is a man who sees clearly and who already knows what he sees, telling him something he already knows. In a domain, this personal is not something you do to a man who has been carrying what Marcus has been carrying for 20 years. They return to their duties. There is a moment, somewhere in these final years on the campaign, that no source records but that the shape of all the evidence points toward, a moment in which Marcus sits with the full knowledge of who Commodus is, what he is deciding, and what that decision is likely to mean. He does not decide in ignorance, but he also does not possess the terrible clarity that hindsight gives us. He is making the decision from inside a life, not looking back at it from outside. From inside a life in which love and duty and exhaustion and hope are all present simultaneously, pulling in directions that no philosophical principle can fully coordinate. He writes, in the Meditations, not about Commodus, not about the succession, not about the decision he is making that he knows is the most consequential of his reign. He writes about not indulging in fantasies about how things will turn out. He is telling himself not to do the thing he is tempted to do. He does it anyway. He loves his son. He goes to sleep. He wakes up in the morning. He is still the emperor, still the father, still the philosopher, still the man who has to make decisions that no amount of philosophical training makes easy. The choosing does not get easier. He just gets better at carrying it. Vindobona, 178 to 180. In the summer of 178, Marcus Aurelius leaves Rome for the last time. He does not know it is the last time, or perhaps he does, in the way that people who have been paying honest attention to their own bodies for decades begin to know things they cannot yet verify and would prefer not to confirm. He has been ill, intermittently, and then more persistently, in ways that the physicians who attend him have been tracking with the careful attention of men who understand that the emperor's health is not a private matter. He goes anyway. The military situation on the Danube has stabilized but not resolved. The peace arrangements he reached with the Marcomanni after the first phase of the wars have held imperfectly, which is the only way such arrangements tend to hold when the underlying pressures that produce the conflict have not changed. There are border violations, disputed terms, tribes on the far side of the river who read Roman willingness to negotiate as evidence that Roman willingness to fight has diminished, which is not accurate but is understandable. Marcus has a plan. It is the most ambitious plan of his reign and the one he will not live to complete. He intends to create 2 new Roman provinces north of the Danube, incorporating the territory that has been the source of the pressure on the border. He intends to solve the Danube problem not by holding the line, but by moving it forward, by bringing the threatening populations inside the empire, rather than fighting them from the other side of the river indefinitely. Whether this would have worked is one of the more interesting questions in Roman history, because it is a question that never received its answer. What the plan tells us about Marcus is that at 56 years old, after 14 years of war and plague and personal loss and all the rest of it, he is still thinking strategically. still looking for the solution that actually solves the problem, rather than the response that manages it for another year. He has not given up on finding a better answer. He takes Commodus with him. Commodus is 17 years old. He has been formally invested with full imperial authority. He is, in the legal sense, already emperor. What he is not, in the practical sense, is prepared. Marcus takes him to the frontier, partly to give him the exposure that preparation requires. And partly, it is hard not to suspect, because having Commodus with him on the Danube is better than having Commodus in Rome without him. The campaign begins in the spring of 179 and proceeds with the methodical competence that characterizes everything Marcus organizes. The military operations are successful. The tribes on the far side of the river are pushed back. The Roman position is strengthened. The new provinces begin to take shape in planning, if not yet in administrative reality. Marcus is present for all of it. But he is also sick. The condition has been building for years, and the conditions of frontier life do not improve it. He eats less. He sleeps with more difficulty. The energy that drove him through the first decades of his reign is still present, but its quality has changed. It has become more deliberate, more expensive. He compensates by sleeping less. He writes more. In the final years on the Danube, the writing becomes almost constant. The physician responsible for his actual daily care, a younger man with the kind of everyday access that proximity provides, observes that the hours between midnight and dawn, which in earlier years were productive writing, hours after which Marcus slept, have become simply writing hours. The sleep is shortened or sometimes absent. He is not doing this because he does not know it is damaging. He is doing it because the writing is more urgent than the sleep, because there are things he has not yet said to himself clearly enough, questions he has not yet answered honestly enough, territory inside himself that he has not yet adequately mapped, and the time available to map it is shortening in ways he can feel, even if he has not said so to the physician. He writes about the present moment, about confining yourself to what is directly in front of you, rather than carrying the full weight of everything that might come, about how the person who is overwhelmed by the future is doing something to themselves that the future has not actually done yet. There is a night in the winter of 179 that the physician later describes to people who ask him what those final months were like. The camp is quiet. The cold is the specific cold of a Danube winter, the kind that makes tent walls creak and penetrates adequate bedding. The physician is present because the emperor's condition has been worse than usual, and someone has decided that medical presence through the night is warranted. He sits in the corner of the tent, near enough to be available, far enough not to intrude. Marcus is writing. The physician watches without watching, in the professional way of someone who has learned to observe patience without making the observation itself a disturbance. He watches the stylus move. He watches the pauses, which are longer than they used to be, longer than the pauses of a man thinking and shorter than the pauses of a man giving up. He is not giving up. At some point in the middle of the night, Marcus looks up and sees the physician is awake. He does not speak immediately. He looks at the physician with the quality of attention that people who knew Marcus always remember. The attention that makes a person feel seen rather than merely noticed. Then he says, quietly, that the physician should sleep, that there is no need to watch through the night, that he is fine. The physician, who knows he is not entirely fine, says he is not tired. Marcus considers this for a moment. Then he turns back to the writing. The physician sits in the corner until dawn. He does not sleep either. What Marcus is doing in those hours is what he has been doing every night for more than a decade. He is checking himself, asking whether he is still the person he is trying to be, asking whether the day just finished moved him closer to that person or further from it, writing the answer down honestly, without the softening that an audience would require. He is writing to the person he hopes will wake up tomorrow. He is writing those instructions for the last time, though he does not know it is the last time, in the way that you never know when you are doing something for the last time until you are no longer able to do it. Marcus Aurelius becomes ill with his final sickness sometime in the late winter of 180. The ancient sources place his death at Vindobona, near what is now the city of Vienna, though some sources suggest a location closer to Sirmium. What the sources do not dispute is the nature of the location. He does not die in Rome. He does not die in the palace. He does not die surrounded by the full ceremony that his rank entitles him to. He dies on the frontier, in the place he has been returning to for 14 years. In the middle of the work, he cannot make himself stop doing, even when his body is stopping the obvious choice. He sends for Commodus. What passes between them in those final days is not recorded in any source reliable enough to quote with confidence. The ancient tradition preserves versions of a final conversation, of instructions given, of wisdom offered to the son who will carry everything forward. Whether these accounts reflect what was actually said or what people later believed should have been said is impossible to determine. What we know is that the conversation happened. That father and son were in the same room, with whatever understanding and whatever incomprehension and whatever love and whatever grief the specific weight of their specific relationship brought into that room. And then it was over. On March 17th, 180, Marcus Aurelius dies. He is 58 years old. He has been emperor for 19 years. The camp is quiet afterward in the specific way of places where something important has just happened, and the people present do not yet know how to organize the silence around it. The physician who sat through the last winter night, who watched the stylus move in the darkness, who saw the quality of attention that makes people feel seen, sits in his own quarters after the news and thinks about those hours. He thinks about what it means to spend the last available nights of your life writing notes to the person you want to be the next morning, not to history, not to the philosophers who will analyze the notebook for centuries, not to the readers who will find it in airports and hotel rooms and on the shelves of people going through something difficult, to tomorrow's self, the self that will need reminding, the self that will wake up and have to decide again, as you have to decide every real thing again every day, whether to be the person you believe in being or the person that exhaustion and fear and the gravity of ease are always pulling you toward being instead. He wrote that reminder for 19 years. He never stopped needing it. He never stopped writing it. On March 17th, 180, he runs out of tomorrows. The notebook stays behind. Rome, 180 to today. There is a statue in Rome that has been standing for approximately 1800 years. It stands on the Capitoline Hill, in the piazza that Michelangelo designed in the 16th century, in a setting so deliberately composed that it looks less like a historical artifact than like a work of art that was always meant to be exactly here, against exactly this sky, in exactly this light. The statue shows a man on horseback. He is seated with the ease of someone who has been riding for a long time and no longer needs to think about it. His right hand is extended, palm down, in a gesture that scholars have debated for centuries. Some say it is the gesture of clemency, the hand extended toward a defeated enemy being spared. Some say it is the gesture of address, the hand of a man speaking to people gathered below. Some say it is simply the presence of a person who is here, paying attention to whatever is in front of him. The man is Marcus Aurelius. The statue is the only surviving equestrian bronze of a Roman emperor from antiquity. Every other such monument from the imperial period has been melted down over the centuries, converted into bells, quine, weapons, other statues. This one survived because of mistaken identity. Medieval Christians, who were systematic about destroying pagan monuments, believed the statue depicted Constantine, the first Christian emperor. They left it alone. The statue of the philosopher emperor was preserved because people thought it showed someone else. Marcus would have found this funny. He wrote about the absurdity of reputation, about how the things people value most in others are often exactly the things that matter least in any genuine accounting of a life. He would have appreciated that his physical image survived 2,000 years because of a misidentification, because the people who might have melted him down thought he was someone more important. He would have appreciated it and then written a reminder to himself not to take any particular meaning from it. Stand in front of that statue and look at the face. The face is composed. It has the quality of someone who has made peace with a great deal and is no longer in the process of making it. It is a beautiful face. It projects exactly what the empire needed it to project: authority, calm, the suggestion that the person at the center of power is equal to whatever the center of power requires. It is also not the face in the Meditations. The face in the Meditations is a face that has not finished making peace with anything. That is still asking the questions that do not resolve. That is still writing instructions for tomorrow's self, because tomorrow's self is still going to need them. That is still uncertain about the most important decisions of its life. Still carrying more than any single person should carry. Still getting up in the morning and going to work. That face is not on the statue. That face is in the book, and the book exists because Marcus was honest enough, alone enough, and disciplined enough to write it, not for the statue, not for the historians, not for anyone, for himself, for the person he was trying to become, for the tomorrow that kept arriving and kept requiring him to decide again who he was going to be in it. After Marcus dies, the world moves on with the particular speed that worlds move on after even the most significant of deaths. Commodus returns to Rome. He negotiates a settlement with the Danube tribes that Marcus would not have negotiated. He begins his reign with enough initial competence that the Senate reserves judgment. Then, gradually, the early competence gives way to something else. A man who is increasingly interested in his own mythology. Who takes the name Hercules? Who participates in gladiatorial displays in the arena? Who governs through favorites and terror rather than through the careful, patient administration that his father built the machinery of the state to support? The machinery still runs. For a while. Institutions are more durable than the people who run them, which is something Marcus understood, and which gives the governance of a complex empire its particular quality. You can be replaced more easily than the institution can be replaced. The roads still function. The legions perform their duties. The administrative apparatus continues to process appeals and manage provinces and keep the basic operational reality of 60 million people moving. But the person at the center matters. And the person at the center is not Marcus. Commodus is assassinated on December 31st, 192, 12 years into his reign, by a conspiracy that includes members of his own household. The year that follows is one of the bloodiest in Roman history. 4 different men claim the throne in 12 months. A civil war settles eventually into the reign of Septimius Severus, a capable and brutal man who stabilizes the empire at the cost of several principles that Marcus spent his reign maintaining. Edward Gibbon, the 18th century historian who wrote the most famous account of Rome's long decline, begins that decline not with the fall of the Western Empire in the 5th century, but with the death of Marcus Aurelius. He argues that with Marcus, something ended that the empire never recovered, not a specific policy or a specific structure, something less tangible and more fundamental, a relationship between power and restraint that was always difficult to maintain and that, in the period after Marcus, became increasingly rare. Gibbon may be overstating the case. Most historians who have spent their careers on this period think the decline of Rome is a process too complex and too long to be pinned on any single moment. But he is not entirely wrong. Something ended with Marcus. The combination, the philosopher on the throne, the man who had the power and also the philosophy, who understood what power required and what it cost, who wrote every night about the danger of becoming what power wants you to become, and who, by all available evidence, managed for 19 years not to become it. That particular combination has not appeared again in quite the same form, not because no subsequent ruler has been philosophical, not because no subsequent ruler has tried to govern well, but because the specific circumstances that produced Marcus, the long education, the slow accession, the genuine intellectual formation, the character that was built rather than assumed, and then the specific circumstances that tested him, the plague, the war, the personal losses, the betrayal, the impossible succession question, all of it together, all of it at once, and the man still writing in the tent at the end of it, still trying, still unfinished. That particular combination has not recurred, and the equestrian statue stands on the Capitoline Hill. The tourists come and go. Some of them have the book in their bags. Some will go home and read certain passages in the small hours when the specific difficulty of their specific life has made sleep unavailable, and the need for something honest and true is the most pressing need they have. They will not find answers in the meditations. Marcus did not find answers in the meditations. He found the questions, more clearly stated, more honestly examined, than he could find them elsewhere. He found the company of his own best self, the self he was always trying to be, the self he was writing to in the darkness. The statue cannot tell you that. The statue can only tell you what the empire needed him to be. The book tells you what he was. What he was is messier and smaller and harder and more real than the man on the horse. It is also, and this is the thing that 2,000 years of readers have recognized without always being able to name it, considerably more useful. Today, the book is still in print. It has been in print, in one form or another, for centuries. Before the printing press, it circulated in manuscript, copied by hand through monasteries and private libraries, carried forward by people who kept it alive without always fully understanding why they felt compelled to do so. The first printed Greek edition appeared in the 16th century. Later editions shaped its scholarly reception and then its popular one. By the 20th century, it had escaped the confines of academic philosophy entirely and made its way into the hands of people who had never taken a philosophy course and were not particularly interested in Rome. It has been translated into every major language in the world. It has been read by heads of state and by prisoners. It has been quoted in courtrooms and in therapy sessions and in military training programs and in the kind of late-night conversations that people have when the easy answers have run out and they are reaching for something that can survive contact with how things actually are. Contemporary military commanders assign it to officers. Executives put it on recommended reading lists. Athletes cite it in interviews. People in crisis reach for it, the way people in crisis reach for anything that offers the possibility of not being alone in the dark. The question worth asking is not why the book is popular. Popularity is easy to explain in retrospect. The question worth asking is, why a document that was never meant to be published, that has no narrative arc, that contradicts itself occasionally and repeats itself frequently, that was written by a man talking to himself in the dark about his own failures and fears and the persistent difficulty of being who he wanted to be, has survived 2,000 years and is still being pressed into people's hands when they need something real? The answer has to do with what the book actually is, which is different from what most people expect when they pick it up. Most people pick it up expecting wisdom. They have seen the quotes. They have heard the passages about not letting other people's opinions determine the shape of your life, about doing your duty without requiring the duty to be comfortable, about the dichotomy between what belongs to you and what does not. They expect a collection of positions, a manual for better living written by someone who had figured it out. What they find instead is a man who had not figured it out, who was still working on it, who was working on the same things they are working on. The difficulty of not being angry when anger is the easy response. The difficulty of maintaining genuine care for other people when other people are consistently disappointing. The difficulty of doing the right thing when the right thing is unclear and the options are all imperfect, and the person who has to decide is tired and would very much prefer that someone else be responsible for the decision. The difficulty of getting out of bed in the morning. The difficulty of being honest about yourself in the dark. The difficulty of trying again tomorrow after today was not what you needed it to be. These are not Roman difficulties. They are not second-century difficulties. They are not the difficulties of emperors or philosophers or people with any particular relationship to power or learning. They are human difficulties, and Marcus Aurelius writes about them with the honesty of a person who is not performing for an audience, who is not constructing an image of himself as someone who has overcome these difficulties, who is simply recording the ongoing experience of a person who has not overcome them and has decided that the not overcoming is not the point. The point is the trying. The point is getting up in the morning and deciding, again, to be the person you believe in being, even when the believing is thin and the morning is hard and everything in the situation is designed to make the deciding feel pointless, not because you will always succeed. Marcus knew he would not always succeed. The meditations are full of evidence that he did not, because the alternative, not trying, not caring, letting the weight of everything that cannot be controlled produce the kind of person that weight wants to produce, is not acceptable. He found it not acceptable. 2,000 years of readers have agreed with him. There is a passage near the beginning of the second book of Meditations that reads like something written for a specific morning, not for posterity. He writes that at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, you should tell yourself that you are going to go be a human being, that the work waiting for you is the work of your nature, that the bees and the ants and the spiders do their work without complaint and without requiring it to be easy, and you have been given something they have not, which is the capacity to understand why the work matters. And that capacity is not a reason to do less, but a reason to do more. He writes this in a military tent, on a river, in the middle of a war that will not end, after years of losses he cannot recover from. He writes it as an instruction for the next morning. He writes it because he needs it. And the remarkable thing, the thing that no 2,000 years of reading has worn away, is that it still works, Not because the circumstances are the same, not because a person reading it in a city apartment in the 21st century is facing anything resembling what Marcus was facing on the Danube, but because the experience underneath the circumstances, the experience of having to decide who you are going to be today, knowing that today will not be perfect, knowing that you will fall short of what you hope to be, and deciding to try anyway, is an experience that does not expire. It does not expire because the question does not change. The question is always the same question, asked every morning, by every person who has not stopped asking it. Who am I going to try to be today? Marcus asked it in Latin and in Greek and in the dark, and in a language that is ultimately not Latin or Greek, but the language that every person uses when they are honest with themselves about the difficulty of being who they want to be. He wrote the question down. He wrote it down so that when the morning came and the answer was not obvious, the question at least was. The book he left behind is that question, asked across 2,000 years. Still waiting for the answer you are going to try to give it today. He did not write it for you. He had no idea you existed. And yet here you are, holding it. That is the thing about honesty. When someone is honest enough, alone enough, disciplined enough to say the true thing without softening it for an audience, the true thing turns out to belong to everyone. Marcus Aurelius did not write his way to peace. He wrote his way through, every night, for 19 years, in a tent on a cold river at the edge of the world. The notebook stayed behind when he was gone. It is still here, still saying what it has always said, in the voice of a man who was not wise enough to have all the answers, but was honest enough to keep asking the questions. Pick it up on the morning when you need it. He will still be there, writing to the person he hoped would wake up tomorrow, hoping that person would try.